So, hi, it's the 10th of Tevet, which is a fast day. It's actually the fastest fast day in all of the Jewish calendar. So I just wanted to say a word right now, just open it up to see what comes out, just to try and connect with today and personalize it and see what is a little chunk of meaning that I think that we can take from today as we're kind of we're getting to the end of the fast here. So a couple of things about today commemorates. So on the one hand, it commemorates the beginning of the siege of Jerusalem, then the end leads to the destruction of the Jerusalem and the exile of the Jewish people. So this is sort of the beginning stage of that. It's understood as the siege of the city. The other big thing, one of the other big things that happens today is a commemoration of the tragedy of the enforced translation of the Torah, of the Bible, into Greek. So you can look at that second one and be like, okay, interesting, but why is that like this mournful thing? Because on the one hand, you can see the idea of translation is a really positive thing. Like it takes the Hebrew that, huge amounts of the world can't access and can't read, and it opens it up so that people all across the world can read the Torah and connect with the Torah. And there's huge benefit to that, obviously. And at the same time, this day really is inviting us to bring focus to what's lost in that act of translation. And I think that that's what I sort of want to try and tease out today, because I feel like so much of our lives, the biggest pains in our lives come from a place where we encounter the intranslatableness of our essence, the fact that we can't communicate who we actually are, and the fact that we can't actually see who our partner is or communicate clearly to the guy down the street, or all of the times that we have conflict and the pains that come through communication and miscommunications. This is one of the more painful areas of our existence, is the inability to really translate ourselves into another person's language. And George Steiner says in his book After Babel, he says that all communication is translation. All communication is actually translation. It's the translation from one language and one universe, one whole country over here of one person to another. And there's always going to be an act of translation in that communication. And there's something tragic about that and painful about that, which is how I'm kind of taking today, is to kind of look at my own life and see all the places of aches and pains that I hold when A, I'm not seen, or B, when the person I'm trying to connect to, I'm not seeing them. The Hebrew word for communication is tikshoret, which is so beautiful because it's based on the root of kesher, which means connection. And of course, that's why we're communicating, is because we want to connect to another person. But it also throws into contrast the fact that, well, you need the connection because you are separate. We're two separate entities. And of course, we want to communicate in order to bridge our differences. And so it's called communication, but it's really translation. There's always something lost in translation. I sit with couples and I sit with my own couple and my own relationship. And I'm trying to even think of one good example of like the tragedy of miscommunication, but I don't have one good example because I have a million examples, and they're all not good examples. I have a million examples from almost every interaction. So many of my interactions with my husband, with my children, there's a mismatch. So often this happens. And, on Facebook, we can talk about all the great things happening and all the wonders of the ways in which we're communicating and the good things that we're doing in our lives. But also we need to take space every once in a while to have a fast day, to have a day when we recognize the painful side as well, and the broken sides, and holding those, with compassion and gentleness. And I think that that's part of the invitation of today, is to say, yeah, it hurts. The original story of the first murder, right? What was the first murder? Cain and Abel, they both bring offerings to God, and Cain's offering is not accepted, and Abel's is. And so it creates such huge pain in Cain that he kills his brother out of jealousy. But that, I think, symbolizes so deeply what happens when what we have to give is not received. Like that first act of murder comes from a place of what I want to give so badly, and I want to give it as an offering, as a sacred offering, and it's not received. And how we feel, how rejected we feel, how lost, how empty, how worthless we feel when what we have to offer is not received. And I think that that's part of the pain of what's lost in translation. It's like, I so want to give to the person I'm talking to. I want them to see me. I want them to receive what I have to share. And when they don't receive that, God, you know, usually people don't want to then murder the other person, as we see with Cain and Abel, but sometimes it makes us want to murder ourselves. You know, if you really zone in on what happens when you feel rejected, I think that there's this place in most of us. I know I have it in me, where if I'm rejected, it turns into this place of, well, why do I even exist? You know, there's like this, there's this hopelessness that comes when we feel rejected, when we feel like what we have to share is either not received or not able to be received, and unreceivable, unlovable. And I think that a lot of this is what the contours of what we're talking about, with the commemorating the translation of the Torah and the tragedy of that. It's also interesting that we're commemorating the siege of a city. It says that when the Torah is translated, it was like they took a lion and they put it in a cage, and this mighty, fierce creature, this wondrous creature, was, you know, now belittled into this sideshow, you know, this creature in a cage. And in a ways, you can also see that as the encasings in language that we're trying to do to our vast, huge spirits, you know, the lion of our soul. We're trying to encase it in something that can be communicated to the person across from us, but that is just, it sometimes feels like a cage that turns the immensity and the grandeur of who we are into something so small and weak. And it's interesting also that the siege of Jerusalem, what is a siege? It's really like placing a container around this holy city, this holy location, all of a sudden gets a siege put around it, a cage put around it that turns this amazing city into something small, to the point of its own destruction at the ninth of Av. So I feel like there's parallels there to the pains that come when we do try to put ourselves into the cage of words to then communicate to the people around us, and it's not received. Or the pain that comes when we look at a person across from us, or maybe we see our enemy, or maybe it's a person in our own family who we see as our enemy because we've encaged them in a misinterpretation of the grandeur of who they really are. So I bless us that some of the wealth of what we can take from today is just a place where we hold with compassion ourselves in our communications, and we hold with compassion the people that we're communicating with, our loved ones and our not so loved ones, to remember that their communication is really a translation, and most likely a lot of their grandeur is getting lost in it, and to hold that place gently. Have an easy fast.